Why is it that the moment you think you know how to think, you stop thinking altogether?
That's a fantastic question. It sounds like a riddle, doesn't it? But for so many of the great philosophical minds, it's not some elegant paradox. It's the reality of their failure to truly begin.
So we're not just criticizing a particular philosophy today.
No, not at all. We are criticizing the very impulse to start philosophizing with this unexamined comfort.
That's the crucial question, isn't it? We are embarking on a deep dive into a text that doesn't just offer a different answer to the big questions. It claims the way we even frame those questions is fundamentally broken.
It really is.
Our mission today is pure deconstruction. We're going to expose the 8 hidden implicit assumptions, this deep, often insidious architecture of what's called the dogmatic image of thought that traditional philosophy has unknowingly relied on for centuries.
And the real irony is that this dogmatic image, this foundation that promises intellectual order, is actually the very thing that has prevented genuine intellectual freedom and creation.
So what's the one thing people should take away from this?
If you walk away with one insight today, it's this. We are fighting for intellectual freedom. The core conflict here isn't between, say, two rival doctrines. It's between the easy, comfortable path of recognition, seeing what you already expect to see, and the difficult, sometimes even violent path of creation.
And the central villain here, the idea we really have to confront, is this hidden, seemingly benign assumption that our minds are naturally good.
Exactly. That they're naturally honest and naturally oriented toward the truth. We start with the assumption that thinking is supposed to be easy, and that's precisely why we never actually start thinking in a real, meaningful way.
It feels like the most delicate philosophical problem imaginable. How do you begin without making these massive, unstated assumptions?
It is. Let's take the classic starting point, the moment of supposed intellectual purification. Descartes. When Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am," he was making a very conscious effort to eliminate what we could call objective presuppositions.
Okay, let's unpack that a bit. What's an objective presupposition?
An objective presupposition is a concept you explicitly require and rely on to build your argument. So before Descartes, if you defined humankind as a rational animal, you immediately required a whole host of definitions for rationality and animality.
And those definitions might be based on unexamined traditions.
Precisely. You're inheriting all this intellectual baggage. Descartes saw that danger, and he tried to strip away every single conceptual crutch. He wanted to start from a point where he couldn't possibly be wrong.
Right. So Descartes skillfully avoids the definition trap, all the historical baggage.
Mm.
But our sources claim he runs headfirst into a much more subtle and maybe much more damaging trap.
Yes, the trap of subjective presuppositions.
Now, what's the difference?
Well, it's a crucial one. Objective presuppositions are contained in concepts. They are explicit, they're things you can point to. But subjective or implicit presuppositions are contained not in concepts, but in opinions, beliefs, and just common knowledge that you assume is universal and innate.
This sounds like the ultimate universal trap, the philosophical shortcut we all use without even thinking about it. That internal phrase, everybody knows.
It's the intellectual comfort blanket. Everybody knows what it means to think. Everybody knows what it means to be a self. And the philosopher, even when they're aiming for total originality, they still rely on this quiet consensus.
So when Descartes establishes the I think, he's assuming the reader implicitly understands the experience of consciousness.
Yeah.
Because, well, everybody knows what it feels like to be an I.
He is. He's smuggling it in. So if you build your entire system on what everybody knows, you've already surrendered to the universalized opinion of the times, even if you are trying to be radical in your concepts.
Yeah.
You've maintained the form of that common discourse.
Wow.
Yeah. The pure self of the cogito appears to be a beginning only because it refers all its prerequisites back to the empirical self, the self that everybody already thinks they know from common experience. Hegel does the same thing, starting with pure being, but assuming that concrete sensible existence is a known, safe starting point.
And this idea of the philosophical circle, starting and then returning to the beginning, is supposed to validate the whole journey.
It's supposed to. But what it often reveals is that philosophy is powerless to truly begin or to authentically repeat because that circle is just too smooth, it's too easy. It's like an intellectual cruise ship, not a deep-sea submersible.
So if even the giants like Descartes and Hegel are still trapped in this comfortable circle of implicit assumptions, then who's the hero? who can actually start philosophy without this intellectual crutch.
Well, for that, you need an anti-hero, someone who operates completely outside the standard moral and intellectual consensus. Our sources introduce a counterfigure who must be entirely without presuppositions, the underground man.
That immediately raises the stakes. We're talking Dostoevsky now, a figure of pure intellectual rebellion, of existential crisis. This isn't just some polite academic disagreement.
Absolutely not. The underground man, and this echoes the ideas of thinkers like Shestov, is defined by his ill will. He doesn't just disagree with the consensus, he modestly, stubbornly denies what everybody supposedly knows.
He lacks the compass, as the text says.
He lacks the compass to make that standard philosophical circle. He can't think naturally, following goodwill, or even conceptually, following pure logic. He's stuck. But that state of being stuck is actually the true beginning.
He is the necessary destructive force, the iconoclast. By denying that comfortable assumption that thought is easy or natural, he forces a real, painful beginning. If you want to begin, you have to embrace the ill will that denies the universal recognition of what it even means to think.
It takes a violent passion to deny what nobody thinks they can deny. And so only this figure, this underground man, is without presuppositions, because he denies both the objective presuppositions of culture and the subjective ones of our natural capacity. His denial is this necessary violent act that clears the ground for creation.
And this sets the stage perfectly for our deep dive into the 8 postulates that uphold that entire comfortable structure he's fighting against, the dogmatic image of thought. Okay, let's look at the fortress the underground man is assaulting. What exactly is this pre-philosophical natural image of thought that has prejudged thinking for, well, centuries?
We call it the dogmatic image of thought, or, to use the more academic term, cauditatio natura universalis, the idea that thought is universally natural. This is the central villain, the pervasive, unstated assumption that the mind is naturally honest, upright, and fundamentally seeks the truth.
It sounds less like a cognitive theory and more like an ethical framework. Why is it dogmatic, orthodox, or crucially moral?
Because it's based on this general representation that thought operates in the element of common sense, understood as an upright nature and a good will. This moral framing immediately transforms thinking from what is a difficult, sometimes impossible act of creation into a simple, easy act of virtue.
And this brings us directly to postulate 1.
Yes. Postulate 1, the postulate of principle, good nature, and goodwill. This assumes thought is just a natural exercise.
Like breathing.
In a way, yes. The core belief is that the faculty of thought is intrinsically endowed with an innate capacity for truth, an affinity with the true.
And we see this echoed perfectly in Descartes' discourse on method, right at the beginning, where he suggests good sense is of all things in the world the most equally distributed.
Exactly. That's the moment where the dogma is formally enshrined in modern philosophy. It suggests that while achieving truth might be difficult in practice, due to distractions or emotions or bad memory, it remains the easiest in principle. The method itself, the source of truth, is said to be easy from the viewpoint of the nature of thought.
So if I fail, the dogmatic image protects itself. The failure is mine, the empirical subject, for not applying the easy method correctly. It's not because the nature of thought itself is fractured or violent or contingent.
It absolutely protects thought from any fundamental critique. If the capacity for truth is innate and good, then any failure must be due to external or circumstantial faults. It's never the system's fault.
And this is where Nietzsche's critique comes in.
Yes, our sources cite him for a very good reason. Why is this image so persistent? Because morality is the only force powerful enough to persuade us that only the good can truly ground the supposed affinity between thought and the true.
That is a phenomenal intellectual maneuver. So philosophy essentially outsourced its own foundation to ethics. To believe in truth as an inherent goal, you first have to believe that the thinking apparatus is morally sound.
You do. And so a truly presuppositionless philosophy, the kind our underground man is attempting, requires nothing less than a radical critique of this moral image. We have to renounce the easy element of common sense and find our beginning in a rigorous struggle against our own comfortable assumptions about our own mental goodness.
Let's see how this natural goodness is structured and then codified in the next postulate.
Right. Postulate 2, the postulate of the ideal, common sense and good sense. This image is sustained by two complementary yet distinct norms, which together constitute the doxa, that ubiquitous opinion elevated to a rational, seemingly universal level.
This distinction between common sense and good sense is crucial, because we tend to use those terms interchangeably. But here they seem to serve two very different functions.
They do, and it's a critical difference. Common sense, or concordia facultatum, is the subjective principle of collaboration. It's the idea of an internal harmony of all our mental faculties, perception, memory, imagination, understanding, all working together toward a single unified goal. Production of a coherent, unified self. It is the norm of identity from the point of view of the pure self, the I think.
So common sense is the internal agreement that keeps the engine running smoothly. It ensures that my memory agrees with my perception about the object that's in front of me.
Exactly. And good sense is the social objective norm. It's the norm of distribution for all us empirical selves out in the world. It determines the specific contribution and proportion of faculties required in each individual case. Good sense is what is considered universally distributed, as Descartes said. It's the operational guide that ensures, in any given situation, we can distribute the mental task correctly to achieve a sensible outcome.
Okay, so common sense guarantees the unity of the self and the unspecified object, which is identity. While good sense is the practical guidebook for how to apply those faculties in the specific empirical world distribution, they are two halves of the consensus trap.
And herein lies the intellectual danger. When philosophy embraces this structure, it believes it's breaking with everyday doxa by refusing only particular opinions, say, rejecting the opinion that the earth is flat or that gods live on Olympus.
But it's not.
It's not, because it retains the essential form and element of doxa, the very framework of common sense and good sense.
It's like rejecting a faulty-specific product, but retaining the entire production line that generated it.
Precisely. If you only abstract from the empirical content of doxa while maintaining the fundamental operation of the faculties that correspond to it, you remain fundamentally imprisoned. The dogmatic image of thought is merely the figure in which commonplace opinion is universalized and elevated to the rational level.
So this orthodoxy, built on a supposed natural goodwill, leaves philosophy unable to truly break new ground. It's forever stuck in the comfortable consensus.
It's a self-affirming loop. The comfort of natural goodness paralyzes the difficult, violent act of thinking something genuinely new. The dogmatic image acts as intellectual cement, setting the boundaries before the process can even start.
Okay, so to maintain this comfortable dogmatic consensus, the thinking process must rely on one single mode of mental operation.
Almost exclusively. And that operation is recognition.
Which brings us to postulate 3, the postulate of the model. Recognition. Now, this sounds like a totally innocent, everyday operation, but you're telling us it's actually a philosophical cage. Unpack recognition for us in this critical context.
In this context, recognition is defined as the harmonious exercise of all faculties focused upon a supposed same object. To recognize something is to confirm that what my eyes see, my hands touch, my memory recalls, and my understanding conceives all point to the established identity of that object.
The famous example is Descartes' piece of wax. It changes its shape, its scent, its texture when you melt it, but I still recognize it as the same wax.
It's the perfect showcase of concordia facultatum, that collaboration of faculties, the cogito, appears as a philosophical beginning precisely because it expresses this unity of all faculties in the subject, grounding their agreement on the immutable form of the same object.
The recognition is not just a psychological act.
No, it's the philosophical grounding for the unity and integrity of the I.
My identity as a self is tied directly to my ability to recognize the identity of objects. But why is this model such a hindrance of philosophy?
Because the dogmatic image based its supposedly transcendental principle, the very foundation of all thought, on an extrapolation from the most insignificant facts imaginable, the banality of everyday recognition. Think of it. This is a wall. Good morning, my friend. Who, the source asks, can possibly believe that the high stakes of truth and the destiny of thought are determined by these mundane acts of identification?
It makes a lot of sense when you put it that way. We're taking psychological consciousness, the empirical fact that I know what a table is, and we're elevating it to a transcendental principle required for all thought.
And this is where philosophical giants sometimes slip into psychologism, even while claiming to reject it. They ground the necessary principles of thought in these empirical acts of consciousness, but the danger goes far beyond mere intellectual sloppiness. Recognition is not insignificant in its effects.
So it's a mechanism of deep social and political conformity.
Yes. This is where we get to the monstrous nuptial.
Tell us about that.
Recognition, the act of affirming the same, always serves established values. It is a profoundly conservative act. So when thought, which supposedly seeks pure, unadulterated knowledge, engages in recognition, it inevitably rediscovers the state, the church, and all the current social values.
And it presents them as if they were an eternally blessed, unspecified, eternal object.
That phrase is it's so damning. It suggests that philosophy, by engaging in recognition, simply sanctifies the status quo. It finds the state in the structure of reason and the church in the structure of morality, and then it turns around and claims these structures are eternal and necessary.
The struggle for recognition, then, always occurs on the basis of established values, honors, wealth, power.
Exactly. It is the conquest of the trophy of the cogitatio natura universalis. This is Nietzsche's great insight. The philosophical laborers like Kant and Hegel, in seeking these harmonious frameworks, were simply providing a high-minded defense for the existing social order. True creation, the truly new, requires stripping thought of its innateness and embracing forces that spring from a central bad nature and ill will.
So recognition is the gatekeeper that keeps the new out. And this leads us to understand how recognition controls the world.
Which is postulate 4, the postulate of the element, representation. This postulate tells us what recognition does to any glimmer of difference that might arise. Under the motto of recognition, difference is crucified.
Crucified, that's a strong word.
It is. It's forced into the pre-existing structure of representation using 4 key limitations, what the text calls the quadripartite fetters.
Let's dedicate some time to these fetters because this really explains the censorship mechanism of traditional thought. The 4 fetters are identity, opposition, analogy, and resemblance. Let's take the first one.
Identity is the first fetter. It concerns concepts. It insists that any new object must first conform to the identity of an unspecified concept, allowing it to be recognized as something same.
So if I encounter a revolutionary new technology, the first step the dogmatic image takes is to say, okay, how is this the same as an older tool? How is it like a hammer or a computer?
Precisely. You have to reduce its newness to a sameness. The second fetter is opposition. This relates to the determination of concepts, usually through comparison. We define something by contrasting it with its opposite.
We box it in by what it is not within a known binary. So it's not chaotic, therefore it must be orderly.
You got it. The third is analogy. This governs judgment and distribution. So if something new doesn't fit neatly into identity or opposition, we have to find parallel structures or relations between determinate concepts. If it's not the same and not the opposed, well, maybe it's analogous. It functions in a similar way to something we already know.
And finally, resemblance or similitude.
This governs perceptual continuity in objects. It's the requirement that what we perceive be consistent with what we expect to perceive. The similar. It looks like a horse, so it must be a horse.
So representation forces difference to be conceived only in terms of these 4 figures. The same, the similar, the analogous, or the opposed. If something is truly radically different in itself, these 4 fetters they can't grasp it.
That is the catastrophic result. The world of representation is characterized by its inability to conceive of difference in itself. If a new phenomenon arises, a new form of consciousness, a new political structure that has no historical parallel, the dogmatic image either ignores it or it reduces it back to an error or a known category. It's an active mechanism of intellectual suppression, ensuring that nothing genuinely novel can disturb the harmonious agreement of the faculties.
So the dogmatic image is desperate to maintain its reputation as the good guy, the natural seeker of truth. And to do that, it needs a clean, manageable explanation for all the things that go wrong in thinking.
Which brings us neatly to postulate 5, the postulate of the negative, error. The dogmatic system insists that the sole acceptable negative that can afflict thought is error, the simple act of taking the false for the true.
And error is always treated as just a failure of recognition, right? I mistook Theodorus for Theaetetus. I made a false calculation. It's a simple mix-up.
And importantly, error always testifies to the form of common sense. It's a failure of good sense, a false distribution of faculties, but the underlying common sense remains integral. The thinker still intended the true. The system, in principle, is pure. Error is always treated as an extrinsic fault caused by distraction or haste or some external circumstance.
The system is self-absolving. Even in failure, the honest character of thought is preserved. But you've pointed out that this view is completely inadequate because there are true philosophical negatives that cannot be reduced to simple error.
Yes, the terrible trinity: madness, stupidity, and malevolence. The dogmatic image desperately tries to treat these merely as factual occurrences caused by external, non-philosophical factors. Madness is a problem for brain chemistry. Stupidity is a low IQ or lack of education.
But our sources argue that these are, in fact, structures of thought as such.
And this is where it gets really interesting and profoundly challenging. Wait, so you're telling me the root of stupidity isn't just ignorance, but a terrifying, formless power residing beneath the conscious self?
It forces us to ask the transcendental question. How is stupidity, not error, possible? If we treat stupidity merely as a reversion to animality, we miss the point entirely. Stupidity is a specifically human form of bestiality because it's a failure to manage the deep, intensive factors of human individuation. What exactly is this ground, this intensive field you're talking about?
The I, or the self that operates through common sense, is usually just an index of the species, or generalized humanity. It's the superficial self. But beneath that self lies a ground, a deep field of intensive factors, a chaotic engine of individuation that operates beneath all the familiar forms of identity. It's the source of everything unique and singular about us, but it is also formless and terrifying.
So when stupidity arises, the conscious mind attempts to rise to the surface, but it drags this pure, terrifying, formless ground with it like a deep-sea creature that's been brought up too fast.
Exactly. Stupidity is that terrifying exposed relationship. Individuation brings the ground to the surface through the eye without being able to give it form or distribution. This constitutes the unrecognized in every recognition. When thought is flayed and separated from its living form, when it's adrift on this barren ground, everything becomes violence, repetition without sense, cruelty.
That's why true stupidity is so disturbing. It's not just getting things wrong. It's an unsettling proximity to utter formlessness. The greatest philosophers who truly tried to think, Artaud, Nietzsche, Dostoevsky, were all haunted by the structural possibility of madness and stupidity because they knew it was an internal feature of the human thinking project, not some external illness.
Absolutely. If philosophy is to begin authentically, it has to confront the possibility of its own collapse in madness, stupidity, and malevolence, treating them as internal, transcendental structures that must be faced, not external faults to be excused.
And this confrontation with nonsense leads us naturally to postulate 6, which deals with how the dogmatic image defines meaning itself.
Yes, postulate 6, the postulate of logical function, the proposition. Traditional dogmatic logic defines sense as merely the condition for the true. And critically, sense remains indifferent to whether the proposition is ultimately designated true or false.
So the false proposition, the sky is green, remains endowed with sense, but it's designated false.
Which means truth and falsity are entirely relegated to designation, to matching the statement to the object in reality. Sense is what the proposition expresses, while designation is what it indicates.
Our source points out that thinkers like Russell formalize this separation. The whole question of truth and falsehood has to do only with what words and sentences indicate, not what they express.
And this separation is disastrous because it neuters sense.
If sense is only a neutral condition, indifferent to the true, it becomes what our source calls an ineffectual phantom.
It becomes a sterile incorporeal, deprived of its generative power. It's Lewis Carroll's famous example. The smile without a cat. Sense is abstracted and neutralized, losing all connection to the actual production of truth. We accept the illusion that truth is simply a matter of adequation, of matching the word to reality, rather than production, the inherent power of the expressed meaning.
So we have to reverse this. We must insist that truth is a matter of production, not adequation.
Exactly. We have as much truth as we deserve according to the sense of what we say. Sense is the genesis of the true. It's the generative series that limits designation. If we stick to the dogmatic image, we're left trying to ground complex, living thought with these puerile, artificial textbook examples propositions arbitrarily detached from their generative context.
So the real logical fault isn't in confusing the true and the false. The fault is assuming that truth and falsity only concern the designation of simple, discrete propositions in the first place. That strips the expressive power, the sense of its capacity to create truth.
And the true danger is the meaningless but formally correct theorem. That's what mathematicians criticize each other for. The dogmatic image can't account for it because it assumes any well-formed proposition has sufficient sense to be designated true or false.
We've spent this time in the dark room, dissecting the dogma. Now we have to turn on the light and look at the alternative. If thought is not natural, not easy, not moral, what on earth is it? I feel like I need to use the mic drop quote to launch this next section. Thought is primarily trespass and violence, the enemy, and nothing presupposes philosophy. Everything begins with misosophy.
That quote is a complete overthrow of postulate 1, that assumption of good nature. Thought is not easy. It is painful, demanding, and most of all, involuntary. It must be aroused, constrained, and forced into existence by absolute necessity.
And that necessity is born of pure contingency.
Of the fortuitousness of an external encounter, the opposite of premeditation. I don't decide to think. I am struck by something that forces me to think.
And that something is an object not of recognition, but of a fundamental encounter. This is the key break from the dogmatic image. This object is not a familiar table or a piece of wax. It can only be sensed.
Which introduces two related concepts we need to decode. The aestheton, the object of recognition, versus the aesthetein or sentiendum.
What is the sentiendum?
The sentiendum is that which can only be sensed. It is the being of the sensible. It's a sign that operates at the very limit of a faculty. And crucially, the sentiendum is imperceptible from the viewpoint of recognition because it refuses to collaborate with other faculties in a harmony. It does not look like, smell like, or feel like anything we've encountered before.
So if I see a regular table, my sight, touch, and memory all harmonize, that's the aestheton. But if I encounter something so genuinely new, say a metaphysical abyss or a piece of art that profoundly disturbs me, my faculties don't collaborate. They seize up.
That is the sentiendum forcing sensibility to its transcendental limit. The object of encounter is the sign that forces sensation. It breaks the common sense, the harmonious collaboration of the faculties, and instead initiates a discordant play, a chain of force and fuse that runs through the mind.
The faculties are unhinged and violent. They don't cooperate on the same object. They confront their own limits and struggle to find a new relation.
Sensibility encounters the intensive, pure, irreducible difference. Memory, forced beyond simple recall, is forced to grasp the immemorial, the dissimilar in the pure form of time. And thought, forced beyond mere conception, is forced to grasp the cogitandum.
The unthinkable.
The unthinkable, the differential essence, the pure problem. This violence is what links them in a chain of force.
And this is the true genesis of thinking. This is how we redefine the idea. The idea is not some platonic form waiting to be recalled, but the instance that runs from sensibility to thought, linking the faculties through this violence. The implication is that ideas are problems.
And ideas refer to a parasense, a parallel sense, not common sense. They are not illuminated by a natural light, which is part of the logic of recognition. Instead, they shine like differential flashes which leap and metamorphose. The true tone of philosophy is distinction-obscurity. The moment you clarify an idea into simple, distinct terms, you've neutralized its philosophical power because you've reduced it back to a recognizable solution.
This emphasis on genesis and violence brings us to the profound struggle of Antonin Artaud.
Artaud's life was the living critique of the dogmatic image. His difficulty was not that he couldn't express himself or find a method, but that he struggled simply to manage to think something. He knew thinking wasn't innate. It had to be violently engendered in thought.
This is a philosophical act of birth, and it sounds incredibly demanding.
It is. Artaud opposed this forced genesis, which he called genitality, the engendering of thought in thought, to the comfortable notions of innateness or mythical reminiscence. To think is to create, and to create requires this whipping, this violent discipline to bring thought into existence. This is the ultimate transcendental empiricism, moving past the comforting idea that the mind is some naturally fertile matron who has always existed.
And this radical definition of creation leads us to the penultimate postulate that must be reversed.
Postulate 7. The postulate of modality, solutions versus problems. The dogmatic illusion is that problems are just givens, neutral challenges set by a teacher or by nature that simply disappear in solutions, and that truth and falsity only apply to the final responses.
The classic school quiz model. The master sets the problem, and our job is to produce the true or false answer. We think the problem is external and the solution is the point.
But the reversal is profound. Truth and falsity primarily affect problems. A solution always has the truth it deserves, according to the quality, the complexity, and the internal determination of the problem to which it is a response. Problems are not neutral. They are ideal objecticities that possess their own sufficiency and universality.
So the truth of a problem is not dependent on the possibility of its finding a solution. That's completely irrelevant. Solvability depends on the problem's internal characteristics, its inherent sense.
Exactly. Solvability must be determined by the conditions of the problem itself, engendered within and by the problem, along with the real solutions. Problems are the differential elements in thought, the genetic elements in the true. If we adhere to the dogmatic image, we maintain the philosophical illusion that problems are merely the neutral double of pre-existent propositions.
If we accept this, then the most dangerous philosophical errors are not wrong answers, but badly posed or distorted problems, problems that are devoid of sense or importance. That's a fundamentally different way to approach intellectual work.
It shifts the focus entirely from efficiency to creativity. The goal isn't finding the answer quickly, it's determining the right question, the idea, with all its intensive differences and difficulties intact.
And this leads us to the final postulate, dealing with the process of intellectual change.
Postulate 8, the postulate of the end, knowledge versus learning. The illusion is that learning, the difficult, involuntary adventure, is merely subordinate to knowledge, the simple, comfortable, innate result we are striving for. We treat learning as the necessary but ultimately disposable road trip to the destination of knowledge.
But the reversal demands that learning is the true transcendental structure. It is the involuntary adventure, linking difference to difference through violence and introducing pure empty time into thought.
Traditional philosophy, even when it introduced time, like in Plato's theory of reminiscence, still subjected it to the safe mechanism of resemblance. We are just relearning what the soul already knew. The new understanding of learning is pure genesis. It's not the empirical time the thinker takes to think. It's the time of pure thought, the process of time seizing thought and forcing its production.
The famous monkey example illustrates this concept of pure learning perfectly, separating the process from the result.
Yes. Imagine a monkey learning to find food in colored boxes based on some complex rule. There is a period where its errors diminish even before it has gained the conceptual knowledge or the specific known rule.
Right.
That moment, when the behavioral patterns shift but the conscious formula hasn't clicked yet, is the moment where the philosopher monkey is opening up to truth. It is producing the true as the limit of a problem that is being completely determined and understood by the process itself.
That is the essence of learning. The truth emerges as the asymptote of a fully determined problem. It's not acquired, it's generated.
To learn is to conjugate the distinctive points of our bodies, our singularities, with the singular points of the objective idea. It's not about the generality of concepts, which is knowledge, but the universal of differential relations, which is the idea or problem. Knowledge continually falls back into experience. It's an empirical figure. Learning is the transcendental movement, the violent training, the paideia, necessary to force the existence of genuine thought.
So we must reject the postulate that knowledge is the simple innate result that validates all the comfortable dogmatic assumptions.
Exactly.
We have completed the demolition of the 8 pillars of the dogmatic image of thought. We started with the comfort of goodwill and recognition, and we have ended by finding a space for a thought without image. A violent, creative, necessary act defined by problems, not solutions.
To synthesize this massive journey, let's go back to the distinction we established earlier, the difference between comfortable recognition and the difficult, necessary thought without image. We can use a modern analogy. Think of the difference between a self-driving car and a genetic mutation.
Okay, let's anchor the ideas with that framework.
Recognition is the self-driving car. It is the harmonious exercise of all faculties. Its sensors, its mapping software, its CPU upon the same object. The road, the established rules, the known signs. Its entire system, its cogitatio natura universalis, is built on the presupposition of a good road and a good will to follow the existing map.
And if it errs?
If it errs, it is a localized external failure, a software glitch, a sensor fault that testifies to the integrity of the overall system. It exists solely to rediscover and maintain established values, the prescribed route, the consensus.
It's the ultimate expression of common sense and good sense, efficiently achieving the expected outcome.
And the thought without image, that is the genetic mutation. It is involuntary, forced into existence by a contingent encounter, a cosmic ray, a viral agent. It introduces pure, empty time, the time of the mutation itself, into the system. It is a violent trespass that forces the existing organism to confront the unthinkable, the cogitandum, and to produce entirely new structures and differential relations.
The mutation doesn't seek a solution to an existing problem of survival. The mutation is the determination of a new biological problem, forcing life itself to learn, adapt, and evolve in a way that couldn't have been recognized or predicted by the old rules.
That's the power of the distinction. True intellectual life is not about maximizing conformity and efficiency, like the car, but embracing the necessary upheaval and pain of creation, like the mutation. We must renounce the conformity, renounce the logic of common sense, and reject the philosophical laborer's ambition to simply rediscover the state and the church in a comfortable, slightly updated form.
So the ultimate destination of destroying the dogmatic image is a thought that is engendered in its genitality whipped into existence. A thought without image, where the logos breaks up into hieroglyphics, each one speaking the transcendent language of a single, unhinged creative faculty.
That is the arduous but necessary start of true philosophical thinking. It begins when the comfortable assumptions of natural goodness finally break down.
And here is our final provocative thought for you to chew on. If the greatest act of philosophical thinking is not solving a complex equation, but determining a problem correctly, then perhaps the most important question we can ask, with modesty and that necessary ill will, is not what is truth, but rather what is the unthought in thought.